All right, thank you, Greg, and appreciate everybody joining. What I'm going to show you is a project that I started early last month, and it's kind of evolved and taken on a life of its own. I've had a number of folks jump in and help out. So it has been a little bit of a collaboration effort, but it is something that I started and I continue to kind of evolve forward and manage. So back in, of course, late February, early March is when we really learned that this thing that's kind of hit us now kind of seemed like it might be serious and something to pay attention to. And a number of people started looking for sets of data, started looking for evidence of how this, what we eventually learned to call a pandemic, might affect our families and businesses and kind of the world at large. And so this has been my effort to surface that data and try to better understand it. So
thank you, Paul, for doing that. I know this has been a really crazy time to be alive. So seeing your efforts and just helping everybody understand through data, really appreciate it.
Well, and I'm not the only one doing this, but I think it's important. If you don't know who I am, I'm a lead consultant with Pragmatic Works, member of the Microsoft MVP program, and I've been in the Microsoft business intelligence space for 20 plus years. I've worked with the fine folks there at CSG Pro. And I've run my own business in the past, and I've been with Pragmatic Works for a couple of years now. So let me just move ahead. And I will tell you that I've presented this solution in a very informal setting a few times now, and it really has been just that, a tour through a Power BI project, Power BI report with a data model, and we've just kind of talked about the different incarnations of this report, where you can go to find it if you want to actually, download a copy and enhance it for your own purposes or use it within your business, or just go out to the web and use it. Like I said, I've done this presentation a couple of times in that very informal mode. So this is the first time I've actually had any slides, and they're very brief. And I will readily admit that about half of the slides that you see right now, I actually put together during Reed's presentation. So you can't laugh if I misspell.
Nice work.
Anything.
Talk about last minute. Nice.
All right. So what is it? It is a Power BI project with COVID-19 daily updated data. That data is curated and maintained by the science and engineering group at Johns Hopkins University. Now, we've been looking at these numbers, daily for the past several weeks now. Couple of months, and the fact that is that if you go to CNN News or you watch KHW or Coin or K2 here in Portland, the numbers that you're seeing likely came from the same data source. This has really become the de facto go-to source for that curated data. At the time, we didn't know that. I just started looking for a set of data and stumbled upon a couple of very kind of brief reports and web pages out in the web sphere. And one of our consultants at Pragmatic Works stumbled across this, created a very simple Power BI report. I took that and kind of evolved it forward, but that's what this data is. So the folks at Johns Hopkins University actually curate data from the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization. So all of the international data comes through the WHO, and all of the US data comes through the CDC. They marry that up. They have a variety of processes there. And you can actually go to their website and they'll walk you through how they curate that data. And then they publish it through a set of CSV files in GitHub. And then I've also married that with world country population information as I've tried to find some correlation between things like population density, per capita cases, per capita deaths, and that kind of thing, which I'm going to show you. So that's what it is. I think what I'd like to do is just dive in and show you some of the reports so you can get an idea of what's out there and what you can go explore on your own. I'm not going to take you through every report and every visual because you have access to this and you're certainly welcome to spend some time with it. So let me just jump over to the actual report. Let me PowerPoint mode here. And I'm actually just going to bring this down to my laptop from another screen. And so this is published to my Power BI tenant. You can see that because I'm logged into my tenant here within the workspace, I'm seeing there's a dashboard and then from the dashboard, as we're accustomed to seeing when you're actually working within your Power BI tenant, there are tiles with summary information. So here you can see at a very high level a live tile page that gets updated, and we can see the distribution of confirmed cases by country. And of course, I can click on any of those tiles, which then navigates me down to the report visuals. And if you've worked with Power BI at all, you're accustomed to the way that the visual experience works. Now, this is great if you're looking at a report within your Power BI tenant, but in order to share this with anybody in the world who may or may not have a Power BI tenant, the way that I approached that is, let me jump over here, and I'm going to take you to my blog. And I must have that open in another window, but I'm just going to jump over to my blog here. And so I have a few posts where I've posted about various updates to this report, waiting for that to render. There we go, it's a little slow. And let me go back to the original post in early March. So this was on March 14th. And so after I built the original report, it had a slightly different look and feel. I did this dark motif, which several of my friends who advocate for good visual design slapped my wrist and made me change the background to white. But I published this to the web, and you can actually just go and click this link. And because when you publish to the web, a couple of things happen. One, you don't have dashboards. And two, you can't navigate to named pages. So I just have these numbered pages down here at the bottom. So I created a report page with little mini visuals on them, and then use bookmarks to navigate to the individual pages. And I believe that the reason that this is rendering a little bit slow is because I'm presenting and I have 3 monitors, so it's just stressing the video on my machine a little bit. This is usually pretty snappy. So for those folks in the world who are just viewing this in the publish to web mode, this is essentially the replacement for the dashboard, which would then allow you just to click on a bookmark button and go to that page, as opposed to navigating through the Power BI tenant. So I am going to jump back and do it that way, though. So let me just back up a little bit. The first page has menu and information, again, for the sake of those who are using publish to web. I'm using bookmark buttons pretty extensively, so I've created a little menuing system here. I do allow someone who has either installed the template app or someone who has downloaded the PBIX and published it to their own tenant. You can set your own country and then set your state, and then I have some pages where we can specifically see trend information just for those regions. Published to web, you can't do that because you don't save the state of the report. I also have instructions here for anyone who has downloaded or installed the template app to connect this to the live data so that they can schedule a refresh. There are a couple of web queries that you have to provide credentials and permissions, and then you just have to indicate that it's a publicly accessible connection. There are two connections there, so just some instructions. And then the summary page that I just showed you. So let me just jump over. We'll start here on the map. So you're seeing summary information, and we're looking at some of those numbers that have been pretty scary as we see them climbing. 2.6 million confirmed cases worldwide. I've learned some interesting things about this data, though. There are really only 3 different metrics that we get through these sets of data. And they're grouped across a number of dimensional attributes, which makes it interesting, and we can get a lot of interesting insights. But the 3 metrics are this: confirmed cases, recovered cases, and deaths. We also have active cases, but I found that active cases is not reliable across all of the regions. So I guess we actually have 4, but I'm not relying on active cases. One thing that I've learned, though, is that the confirmed number in most places just goes up. So as the CDC and the WHO are collecting this information, they're essentially counting test results and hospital admissions, and they're just counting people who have ever been confirmed to have been infected by COVID, but they don't really have a mechanism to decrement that number. And so it's the recovered cases that we're comparing with confirmed cases to try to figure out how many people currently have the virus. That's what they've attempted to do with active, but like I said, that's not as reliable as just subtracting recovered from confirmed. If we go to the map here, I'm actually just going to go to that page.
Also, I got a great comment. I think you're using Chrome. If you use Edge, I think it helps with Power BI.
Well, since I've queued everything up in Chrome, and I appreciate the suggestion. Yeah, I'm not prepared to reset, but thank you for that. Unfortunately, our shape map has a lot of red on it lately, and that's kind of alarming. And the reason for that is just because of the wide range of values that we see. We're not accustomed to seeing so much red, but you can see that I have some custom tooltip pages. If I hover over the United States, you can see the number of recovered cases, which awesome to see that the recovery rate is going up in the United States. And of course, I get the cross highlighting that I'm used to seeing in Power BI. These are state level numbers. We actually have county level numbers in the United States, but the US is the only country in the world where we have county level information. And then we only have state or province level information for a few countries, which include Canada, the US, and Australia, I believe. But of course, I have right click and drill through. Let's go do that again. And let's come down to the country state profile page. So for the United States, we see this broken down by the top 10 states in terms of confirmed cases, and then the top 10 states in terms of deaths. Now, because in a chart like this, it really doesn't make sense to show 50 separate values. The lines would be very crowded. And just getting some feedback, providing a tooltip with a summary, and also using data labels was really important with this particular set of data. Just looking at a visual doesn't really tell the whole story, but we really have to limit values to the top 10. To see the whole story, I put a table next to the line chart. So this is everything, not just the top 10, but of course with it sorted like this, the top 10 items on this list are going to correspond to the line chart. And then I use some conditional formatting to change the background. In the stacked column, you're seeing.
Hey, Paul, I'm getting somebody said, do you have Zoom it? Are you able to zoom into some of these pieces?
I certainly am.
Awesome.
Yep, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
All right. And I can actually zoom in interactively as well. So let's do that. Okay, and of course, if we wanted to see those states that have the least amount of confirmed cases, we could sort that. Just use the natural capabilities within Power BI to use column headers for sorting, etc. Okay, zoom back out. And so let's say that we want to actually let's sort this by state and go down and take a look at Oregon. I'll zoom back in once I kind of get my perspective there. So you can see that as of my last refresh date, which is today, so this date is actually up to date. The cadence of refresh updates through Johns Hopkins University ranges from hours to up to a full 24 hours. I think they're being a little more diligent about keeping the data up to date. I'm actually refreshing the data model in my tenant 3 times a day, trying to catch those updates as they come. But now that we're looking at the 2,059 cases in Oregon, which is as of the last update that we get. Let me go ahead and zoom in on that. And I can right click and then we can drill through to a county level report. Zoom out just so we can see that report load. And then that lets us actually see where we are in terms of counties. So, you know, they've been talking about this leveling off period, and we're actually seeing an interesting insight here just as we look at this. So the number of cases still seems to be climbing. At least it's climbing in Multnomah County, which is at the top there. But if we look at the number of deaths, we're actually seeing that level off. So you know, it's not it's not something to go out and have a party about. But you know, there's some relatively good news here in terms of the level off effect, which is what we're looking for. I'll show you another report a little later on where we can take a closer look at that. I'm going to jump down to trends and forecast. Reed was using the forecast feature of the line chart a little bit earlier, and I've done the same thing here. And let's go ahead. In fact, rather than using the zoom in, I'm actually going to use focus mode. Let's do this. I'm going to go down and just look at the United States. Okay, didn't change things too much. So in terms of confirmed cases, we're taking the last, let's see, well, since 3/9, we pull that all the way back to the beginning of all of the reports that we have. Not so good news there. If we use a forecast algorithm to continue to predict what that slope might be like. But because things have changed of late, let's narrow that window a bit. And you can see that the outlook for it's still not looking too good. So, but what I'm doing here is I'm using the forecast algorithm that's baked into the line chart. Actually, I have a link here because some folks may not be familiar with the algorithm that's used. It's an exponential smoothing algorithm. You're able to essentially say, look for a pattern, predict that forward. If there's an even slope, then you're going to see this kind of effect here. So if we were to look 30 days out, if this trend were to continue, of course, that's a big if, then we would be looking at a median forecast of 1.6 million confirmed cases in the United States. And then with a 99% accuracy, that could be as high as 2.6 million and as low as about 700,000. And so
what you're saying is we should definitely open up like Georgia, right?
Well, and not travel to Georgia if they're going to do that. You know, I hope that having information like this in front of people will help people understand that you know, the party's not over. You know, we're definitely not out of the woods, and we're not going to be anytime soon. But we are starting to see some of these curves begin to round down just a little bit in different areas, which is you know, a little bit encouraging.
Hey Paul, we got a great question as well. Are you appending the individual daily files, or just relying on the file where new dates or a new column are added each day? And
so I'm going to come back, and I'm actually going to show the approach that we took for the query. I'm going to answer all of those questions. Let me jump over to the population and cases. You know, in the world of data exploration, we oftentimes go looking for an answer or hoping to find an answer, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. And this is one of those cases. So my theory was, if I could go out and I could get current population data by country, and then compare the confirmed cases, you know, the deaths, non-confirmed cases, to population by country, maybe we could find some correlation between population density or, you know, just the population of a country. And though there certainly is some evidence of that, it's not one of those things like, you know, beer and diapers that seems to go together. So I calculated cases per capita, just taking the population of a country across the confirmed cases. And let me zoom in on this. So what's interesting is that where we're seeing an extremely high rate of cases per capita are in very isolated areas, and these two are both in Italy. So San Marino is actually a region of Italy that, for some reason, the World Health Organization recognizes it as a country. But it's actually a state or a region within Italy. Does anybody know what Holy See is? Population 801.
Let's see.
It's a tiny place.
It is a tiny place.
What? Holy See?
Yeah, the clue is, if you Google it, it'll tell you what it is.
I feel like it's an island.
No, it's not. It's another name for Vatican City.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And so, but the thing is that what we're seeing here is really a skew based on the low population. And so, you know, we know that there were cases early on in Vatican City, but there are only 800 people who are actually, you know, actually residents of Vatican City, and 9 of them were infected. And so that just runs this number up very high. And so you really have to pay attention to numbers like that to realize that when you have a small sample set, that the statistics can be a little misleading. So I also looked at density population or I'm sorry, population density. Let me see if I can. Yeah, so I'm just sorting by the actual population density of different countries, and the country that has the highest population density in the world is the country of Monaco. You know, there's only two towns there. They're right next to each other, and the whole country is barely big enough to have a race every year. But they actually have a relatively low number of cases. So, you know, this is all really interesting to look at, and we can draw some conclusions and learn some interesting things. But until we really can study cause and effect, it's really hard to step back and say, in densely populated areas, there are higher outbreaks, because that's just not true across the board. Obviously, Italy and some of the countries in Central Europe and along the Mediterranean have had high outbreaks, but you know, that may or may not have just simply been coincidental. And then finally, let me show you the recovery rate. I'm really looking for a silver lining here in this data. So the recovery rate is simply the number of recovered cases over the number of confirmed cases. And so in this chart, you can see that currently the small country of St. Lucia have had 100% recovery rate. So everyone infected has recovered. China, and again, this has been in the news quite a bit, claims to have a 93% recovery rate. And you know, there may be truth to that, but then again, we also just know that a lot of the data that we're getting, which is controlled by these governments, by these countries, just may not give us apples to apples comparison. You know, again, we're relying on the WHO and the CDC to tell us what a country is. Apparently, the Diamond Princess cruise ship, which I believe is currently docked in Oakland, is a country. That's because nobody wants to claim it. But, you know, again, you know, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. So we do see a few outliers like this where, you know, we obviously know that cruise ship is not a country. But it is interesting to see where they're having high recovery rates. And of course, that begs the question, what can we learn from these countries? You know, what are they doing that we're not doing? Because unfortunately, if we flip that around, we're pretty low on that list, where we have a 9.2% recovery rate with almost 900,000 confirmed cases. All right, so let me, that's the report. You're welcome to go out and just go to my blog and follow that link to the report and you know, use that. But I'm going to show you a few other places where you can actually go to get this information. Let me get back to PowerPoint. If I can figure out how to get back to PowerPoint. All right, so where to go? My blog. If you just want to look at the report, that's the simplest thing to do. Just go to my blog, and in that original article, I have a link. I've posted updates 2-3 times, and then I repeat just the link so you don't have to go fish for it. And that's the published to web version of the report. I do update that every few days or up to every week or so. So it is fairly up to date as I've made corrections and made some enhancements. If you would like a copy of the entire project, also on that blog post, you will find a link to my GitHub repo. This is available publicly. You don't have to log in. You can just go grab the PBIX file, and you are welcome to use that in any way that you like. Now, back in early March, when I began to put this project together, I was actually attending the MVP Summit with Reed and 2,000 of our closest friends. And during the summit, as I began to work on this, I reached out to members of that community and essentially said, hey, I'm working on this project. I would love for it to be a collaborative effort. I've got some technical questions and issues that I'm having with consuming this data and getting it to refresh. So who wants to pitch in? And I got some takers. Jamie Johnston from Houston immediately jumped in, and he downloaded a copy and built his own report. And I had a number of other people help out. Miguel Escobar jumped in and helped with Power Query. Reza Rad actually ended up building the query that I'm going to show you that resolves some refresh issues. Once we got that built out and a couple of weeks went by, I was then contacted by the partner community folks at Microsoft who said, hey, we see that you've put this this COVID report out on GitHub. We've taken a look, looks good. It looks like something we'd like to get behind and promote. So would you mind putting together a template app and publish that through Pragmatic Works, because you need to be a partner to publish a template app that people can install. And we'll put that out on AppSource, and then people can actually install this into their tenant. So you can go to AppSource and get that there. And I'll show you how to do that. Quick timeline. Johns Hopkins University first published the first file and stood up their GitHub repo on January 22nd. While attending the MVP Summit, I learned about this data. It was actually Nick Lee at Pragmatic Works who put together a rather simple report scraping a website, but it was fed by this same data. And that kind of inspired me to go to the GitHub repo and start actually getting those CSV files. So I published that first report publicly on March 14th. And then on March 22nd, Johns Hopkins changed their data format, which broke all of my reports.
Darn it, Johns Hopkins.
And they only did it because the CDC actually introduced new fields and you know, so they're trying to help out, but you know, it can be a little chaotic when things change, as we all know. And yep. So right after that, Robin Abramson, one of my colleagues from Pragmatic Works, and I spent an entire weekend fixing the data model, and that's what you will see.
Bless Robin's heart. And Robin had a great user group presentation for us a couple months ago on dynamic filters. Robin's amazing.
Yeah, Robin is amazing. I work with her. We actually are working with the same client, and Kirill's actually on that team as well. So we have a good time working together, and we challenge each other quite a bit. All right, well, I'm going to show you kind of how this came together. And so let me jump over to Power BI Desktop and just get into the weeds. So, you know, as a lot of things like this are, it was quite simple at first and then became more complicated as we really tried to kind of standardize and make this something that would be very useful and reliable as the data is. And you know, this is data that's constantly changing every day. And so you're always going to have data quality and data reliability questions, but you know, it's being brought together from a lot of different places, and that creates a lot of chaos. So the first thing that I did, is I went, make sure I've got the right browser open, is I went to the Johns Hopkins GitHub repo here and found these files. So you can see that that they have collected these CSV files. And I'm gonna have to zoom in and out on you here. If we get down into this folder, you can see that let's see, daily reports. So the US data was structured differently than the international data, simply because it came from different places. US data again comes from the CDC. And so they work very hard to kind of marry up all of that data and produce these CSV files. And so just using Power BI naturally, using Power Query, we went and grabbed a file and imported it and got the schema, all of the columns, data types, etc. brought that into a query, published it as a table, and then derived dates and countries and various attributes from that. And, and that was all well and good for a long time until right about here, where you can see there's a little note that says adjust values, and then there's all kinds of updates and all kinds of things that went on. And so first of all, I learned that in the way that this data is published, that the GitHub connector will not let you point to a folder in a repo online and merge those files together. That's just not something that the GitHub data connector was designed to do. So I ended up having to do two different queries. So I have one query that goes and gets the files. Let's show you that. Why am I not seeing my properties over on the right side? I'm not used to not seeing the properties over on the right side of a query.
That is weird.
Yeah, that is weird. I agree that that's weird. Let's.
It's the demo gods, Paul.
Oh, it always happens. Let's just go back to desktop and relaunch Power Query. Much better. I must have closed the window. All right, so if we go back and we just get all of the, here we go. We get all of the files. Oh, this, you know what? This is actually a change that Reza did. So what I was doing is I would just get the standard list of files and then expand a file and then try to expand the binary. And that didn't work against the GitHub repo. And we found that using that common technique of trying to, essentially say, get all of the files in a folder and then expand them. I got that to work in one scenario, in one query design, yet when I published it up into the Power BI service, the formula firewall would block that from refreshing, and it wouldn't allow us to refresh that. So I reached out to the community and I said, hey, experts, how do you solve this kind of problem? And Miguel Escobar actually built a query all in one Power Query with a whole bunch of M, because of course Miguel speaks M and that's kind of his thing. And Reza took a very different approach. And so this was actually the result of what Reza did. He actually treated this as, I think it's, just web contents. And so you can see that you're actually getting XML data back, and he actually converts that into a table, which just creates this block of XML tags. And then he does some fancy things to break those down into records, trim all of the text, remove all of the blanks, extract text from delimiters, and then eventually breaks all of that down into a single column in a table. And then we call a function against that file to go match the date up to the name of a file and extract the contents of the file. It's some pretty advanced M. And this all worked just beautifully until they changed the file format on March 22nd. The way that Robin and I decided to approach this is we had a query that was bulletproof and completely dependable that would work with all of the files up through March 21st. And then we just rinsed and repeated for everything after March 21st. So you can see that I've got another one here that's just filtered for after March 21st. And I think I'm sure that Brian's on the call, and I'm sure that Brian is laughing at me right now. Brian, can you confirm that you're laughing at me right now? Because there was a lot of brute force to this M, but I'm going to blame it on Reza because he came up with the solution. So anyway, that's the general approach. So if we go back and actually look at these base queries, you'll see that we invoke a function that takes the base name of that file, which is really just the date, and it passes it into this function, which then goes and extracts data out of the file, and then we take that table and we combine them all together. And then we take the two queries that have mismatched columns, and we get really creative about adding custom columns and renaming the columns and making sure that the data types all match up, and then append them together. And that's what this case details table is. So if you would like to consume this data and you don't want to go through the same hell that we went through to get all of this data to match up and to work, you're welcome to download this PBIX and use this as a starting point. You're welcome. From the case details then, because we actually have all of the country and state, and then for the US, the county names, I extract that into a separate country state query or table. Counties were actually introduced after I built the model. So we actually left counties back in the case details table rather than trying to deal with 3 different levels of grain across our geographies. And then to be able to match the countries in the country state table here up with the population by country table, which I actually get from the Worldometers website. I just created a distinct set of countries, and this just becomes a bridging table. There was a question earlier about how often, and I think this was posed to Reed, but how often do you break data modeling rules? And I'm going to answer that question right now. So you can see that in this data model, we've had to bend a few rules for a couple of reasons. One, because we're getting data from different places and it doesn't naturally match up. So the country names as described by the WHO are not the same as those on this website. And because we are working at different levels of grain, it was necessary to bridge the country twice, and I needed to add 2 bidirectional filters on those relationships. So bidirectional filters are something that I try to avoid at all costs, but in this case, it seemed appropriate. We're dealing with a fairly small volume of data, and it really doesn't affect performance that much, but it's not a go-to design pattern typically. So I'll stop there and just ask if there are any questions about how we obtain the data. And that was an earlier question. Do we do deltas, or do we reload everything? We do reload everything because the CSV files don't support any kind of an incremental refresh. Now, I may have actually turned off data load on this older query. I don't recall whether we did that or not. Yeah, so I suppose we could say that in a very kind of rudimentary way, we are partitioning this data because there's no reason to, oops. Yeah, there's no reason, I was looking at the wrong one. There's no reason to reload the, oh, I'm sorry, I stand corrected. I was looking for include and report refresh. So I guess we are reloading that data, thinking that perhaps there will be changes, but for some reason I don't even have the ability to turn off the report refresh. So these files are being reloaded every time we refresh.
We had a funny question. What would Marco and Alberto say about your data model?
You want to quote Alberto? You can do it.
Well, I can't remember. They have this thing about bidirectional.
If you use a bidirectional filter,
oh my God, that's perfect.
To hell.
that was amazing.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it just echoes in my head every time I build a data model and break that rule.
At least we know that we're breaking a rule.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about what we've done with this data model and the accompanying reports since this time. So I've told you that I've published it to the web, which just makes it available to anyone. Since we've been in quarantine, my extended family, and this is prompted by my father up in Sequim, we have a weekly Zoom meeting, and so all of the members of the extended family get together and we talk. And I'm really the only techie in the family. And so these things have evolved in kind of a show and tell of, what are you working on? What's new in your world? And I showed this to my family, and the story there for the non-technical audience was, go to my blog, click this link, and on this quote unquote, I'm using air quotes right now, website, you're able to click around and you can see comparative cases and recovery rates by country and by state and by county. And since members of my extended family are all over the country, we were kind of comparing, how well our communities are doing with recovery and kind of leveling off the COVID cases. And so for that audience, I published this publicly. And then you can go to GitHub and just download a copy of the PBIX and work with it that way. But we have one other mechanism that was used, and let me show you how this actually works. So I learned some interesting things about creating template apps and how Microsoft are thinking about the enterprise Power BI story, and in terms of application lifecycle and managing development and testing and production in a disciplined manner. And these are standards that are evolving. Power BI started out as a self-service tool. It's kind of now evolved into a more enterprise scale tool as I think we're all kind of facing the reality now that the data modeling engine is in fact analysis services. And with the XMLA read-write endpoint, now we actually have access to that analysis services database underneath Power BI, and we can script it and build partitions and do stuff we've been doing with enterprise tools for a long time. But template apps were really the first way that Microsoft have exposed their kind of long-term roadmap of how they want you managing things. So let me show you what that looks like. If I go to apps here in my template, and I'll zoom in on that so you can see what I'm doing. So in your Power BI template, just go up to apps. You have access to these things called template apps. And a template app is essentially a workspace app that someone has created, they've prepared, and then they've published it either within your organization or externally using AppSource, which is essentially the Microsoft store for a lot of different things, a lot of different products, including Power BI. And you can install that template app as a workspace app within your tenant. And that's what I've done. And the way you do that, you can see I have it installed, but I'm going to go pretend like I don't. So I go to Get Apps.
Hey, Paul, if you totally search for Havens Consultant, I wouldn't hold it against you. I got like 7 of them in there.
Oh, within apps, sorry.
Look at all those apps that I built.
Look at that. Yeah, a little shameless self-promotion there, Reed.
Just a little bit. One of them actually just got published yesterday, the Uber one.
So if we search for Pragmatic Works, we get one. Let's see that. And how many people does Havens Consulting employ, Reed?
Myself and like one other. Okay. But I do get like 500 downloads about a week off of the template apps. They're really nice for business leads. Awesome.
I work for a company with about 110 employees, and here you are showing us up. Anyway, but there you see, I've searched for and I've found my template app, so I can say get it now. Now, when I get it, it's going to say, well, you already have it. But I can install it again. Now, if I had incremented my version, can you see how much trial and error it took to get this right? I'm up to version 14. So, but because it's the same version, I currently have the highest version. It says, you want to install this in a new workspace, or do you just want to overwrite it?
Can I make one point about that, Paul?
Yes.
So we created and published a COVID-19 tracker as well, and Jeremy Webster and Bastian were the ones doing that. And one thing we ran into, because we were publishing to the web, without doing something like template app, it just gets so hairy, because if you try and do a revision, something changes, your publish to the web link breaks, and you just run into like way too many difficulties, rather than, I think publishing to a template app makes so much more sense.
Yeah. I'll tell you, when the Power BI team began to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit on their enterprise story and talk about deployment pipelines and now release management, which I'm going to show you some screenshots of how release management works. My first impulse was, and I'm kind of thinking through the minds of my clients, trying to put my feet in their shoes, and I'm thinking, well, hey, this doesn't integrate with Azure DevOps, and it's not part of Visual Studio, and so you don't create build scripts and ship this deliverable in the same way that we're accustomed to doing with more traditional kinds of solutions. I kind of dismissed it as in, these guys really aren't in touch with reality. However, I'm really learning to embrace the product team's approach. We know that the world is moving to the cloud very quickly, and these cloud-based tools and everything kind of centered around, Power BI, premium dedicated capacity, everything managed in the cloud, really is the forward direction. So there's some smart people at Microsoft who really do have these things figured out, and
kind of smart, right? Kind of smart.
This is being recorded, so I don't want to comment on it.
Very smart, extremely smart.
Right. Anyway, but that's how you install an available template app. Now, after you do that, you'll actually be prompted the first time you install it. You'll be prompted to set up your new workspace app. I'm going to take you back to PowerPoint, show you what that looks like. So I just grabbed a screenshot. Move forward. Yeah, so there was my changing data format. I'll give you an idea of how much the file format actually changed on March 22nd. And not only did they add more columns, they actually changed a bunch of columns and they added them in a different order. So it was kind of a hard thing to accommodate, and that's why we actually have two separate queries that then we very cautiously append together.
Hey Paul, we are almost 10 minutes over, so just giving you a time check.
Okay, all right, let me wrap up in 5 minutes.
Cool.
All right, so when you install, you will be prompted to provide connection information, and because these are web connections, We're just authenticating using anonymous, which means that you're not actually logging in. All you're doing is saying, I agree that it's okay to connect to this data source. And we have two different data sources, one to the Johns Hopkins GitHub repo, and then one to that Worldometers website where I pull the population information. So you just have to choose public and click sign in. That's all that's about. I think that kind of disavows Microsoft of any safety issues with going and getting data from the web. So when you build a template app, you do this, and I believe that this has to be in a premium workspace. And Reed and or Greg, you may need to verify that for me, but I think this is a premium thing. Within your workspace, you actually have this release management pipeline where you publish your app to a workspace, and you can customize it. You can provide a description, change the color theme, a logo. And once you've done that, then you promote that from your workspace into a test pipeline. And then you continue to push that down into these different stages from workspace to testing to pre-production. And at each of these, it actually creates a separate app. And so if you want, what was the answer?
Oh no, sorry. I was just agreeing with you. Like, yeah, they basically create separate environments each time.
Yeah. I don't think you need a premium workspace though, Paul.
That's correct. No, yeah, it's just any pro license can do this. You just, when you create the workspace, you just have to toggle create template app. The only thing you can't do though is once it's a template app, you cannot convert it back ever to a regular workspace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I think about it, I actually did this in a non-premium workspace. So. Yep. And you can actually get a link for any of these published stages, and then once you push it into production, you grab that link, and then that's the link that you would use to get it into AppSource. And for your organization, you can simply publish this as an available installable app in your organization. But then in order to publish it into AppSource, there's actually a separate form that it's the partner community portal, I believe, that a partner would use. And you simply go in, you register it, you paste that link and say, here's an app, we'd like you to review this. And then if it's okay, go ahead and publish it into AppSource. And so that's what we did. That's how it was created. And that is the end of the presentation.
Yeah, and the crowd goes wild for Paul. Thank you so much, Paul. This was great. I mean, not only giving us a flyover of how to work with the COVID data, but also just talking about template apps and really walking us through a lot of that. So thank you.
One thing that I will ask is if this data is interesting to you, just beyond casual observation. And, I'm not a statistician. I'm not a data scientist. There are a lot of things.
Are.
No, I'm not. I'm a BI guy, and I can visualize stuff. But my point is that if you have the chops for doing something deeper with the same set of data, please go to the GitHub repo, enhance the report, and let's collaborate and put that back into the GitHub repo, branch it, put it back in, merge that back in, and then send me a note so that we can work together to make this more valuable.
That's great. I hope the community does some reach out. And also I think, in the post, Chris Weiss put some extra data sources worth exploring. I saw somebody put the documentation for template apps. We did have a question, Paul. I don't know if you're going to know this, but do you know what the new certifications are that replace the discontinued MCSA tests?
I just took the beta exam for DL100. Is it DL100, DP100?
I think DA100 or
whatever it is. It's the new Power BI design exam. So that's the exam. I know that the the whole certification approach, they're moving away from product-centric certification to role-based certification. And what we're seeing evidence of now is that you can certify as a business application specialist focused on BI, and you can certify as a business intelligence specialist with more of a focus on enterprise BI. So I don't know, when we're going to see that and exactly what it's going to be called, but that's the direction that they're moving.
That's some great insight.
Yep.
We got some more thank yous. Thank you to Reed and Paul for excellent presentations as always. Give maybe another minute for questions. This was a pretty fantastic, 5th year wrap up. Really happy to have you guys on, by the way. Okay, we're seeing DA 100 is Power BI. Alex Powers, thank you so much for all these great responses you're providing us. Nice hearing from a Microsoft inside guy. And so that's why we were saying everybody at Microsoft is extremely smart, right, Paul?
Well, yes, of course. That's why they work for Microsoft.
Yeah. Any closing remarks, Reed or Paul, as we wrap up?
No, I appreciate everyone's attendance. I'm looking across my office here in my windowsill next to my massage chair. I'm actually rereading an old book written by Bill Gates called The Road Ahead. It was written about 15 years ago. And so far, every prediction and what prompted me to read this is that Bill Gates 5 years ago predicted the coronavirus outbreak.
Yeah,
and so I'm going back and I'm reading this book about his thinking about this thing that called the information superhighway and all these other crazy things, like people will have handheld computers in their hands. And let me just say that Bill Gates has been right about just about everything that he's ever predicted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some really smart people at Microsoft.